non-fiction literary festival and the largest in central India. We function online similar to other established literary festivals across the country, but with a difference that we have purely non-fiction authors in action here in Nagpur. Each year, we have a central theme to the festival. This year's theme is non-fiction for inclusion. And in line with this theme, we have various authors and topics that instill these values in us. Inclusion, to be included, to be provided equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded. Inclusion of minorities, marginalized sections of society, inclusion of the differently abled, inclusion of the privileged too. Willingness to accept books of each section included in this festival. The receptiveness of readers of Maja Nagpur to lend a ear to every marvelous author included. Readers are assured to be enthralled with a fantastic array of most intriguing non-fiction books wound so seamlessly in astounding narratives by an inclusive lineup of incredible authors. I now request our moderator, Ms. Mandira Nevare, to usher our author to the podium, please. Ms. Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings, is about one of the greatest rulers. Now lives in the city that never sleeps, New York. She has an extensive training in Carnatic music, Bharatnatyam, and Western Carnatic music, also Pianoforte. Her longer than desired stint in corporate world that included Chase Manhattan Bank and McKinsey & Company was followed by a complete change in direction back to her true loves, top among which are music and writing. Please bring your hands together for Ms. Kamini Dandapani. Before I introduce our fantastic moderator, I request Nagpur readers to please keep your mobiles on silent and do not indulge in conversation amongst yourselves. We are here to listen to the author. Introducing the moderator in focus, Mandira Nevare. She is practicing architect in her firm, Mandira Architects, and the co-founder and owner of Orange Odyssey. A very interesting lineup, Orange Odyssey. Heritage and cultural experience curators who provide select special experiences by customizing the destinations for curious travelers who wish to explore Nagpur and Vidarbha. Orange Odyssey by Ms. Mandira Nevare is only for Nagpur and Vidarbha. Besotted about Nagpur, she strives for her city and its rich history. Heritage to be known by all. Apart from being an architect, she is impassioned about art and photography. Please welcome Ms. Mandira Nevare.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're here for this amazing book, Rajaraja Chola, Kings of Kings, by our very own author, Kamini Dandapani. So to begin with, actually, I'll just give you a brief. So here it says, Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings, incomparable Chola, great savior, jewel of the solar dynasty, lion among kings, was one of the greatest rulers of medieval India. In their heyday, and especially under their greatest king, few empires or emperors could compare with the Cholas and Rajaraja. Now, this researched and brilliantly told biography brings to vivid and compelling life of one of India's greatest empires and rulers. So we're here for the Rajaraja, but to begin with, I wish people actually to know the person behind bringing the King of Kings from the 9th century to reintroduce us in the 21st century here today. So I want them to actually know your transition from from the phase when you said that you didn't like history much to actually coming to this.
Yeah, I have to confess, as I did in an earlier session, that history was one of my least favorite subjects in school, and that was primarily because of, one, how it was taught when I was growing up, and two, because of the reputation it had as a subject that was for the duds. You know, those who couldn't get into the more desirable professions did history, was how it was thought of. So that was what was in my head. Fortunately, I had a father who was passionate about history, and you know, your parents keep telling you things and you say, yeah, but clearly something lodged in my head, and that love came alive maybe about 15 or 20 years ago, you know, when I was traveling around India, and I said, oh, wow, these things are really interesting. Why didn't anybody tell me this stuff? So I started a blog in which I wrote about just my discoveries, and I did a little more research than a traditional blog, I guess, which fortunately for me caught the eye of my publisher, who asked me if I would write this book. So it took me on a journey that I would never have dreamed that I would have gone on, you know, because I'm many decades old, so I guess I've reinvented myself many times. I would not ever call myself a historian, because that would be disrespecting real historians like ones we have here. But it has been a very, very rewarding journey. And as I said in my earlier session too, I stand on the shoulders of the giants who did all the, you know, difficult work, the incredibly tedious work of you know, deciphering the inscriptions, translating them, making them available in a form and format that are accessible to people like me. So I was fortunate to have all that laid at my feet, and I just kind of picked up those threads and put it into something that you and I can hopefully understand and appreciate. So, yeah.
So for the readers of Nagpur, actually to put into context, what century are we in?
Okay, so the Cholas actually are a bit unusual because there were two periods in which they ruled. So there was one lot that we call the Sangam Cholas because of the poetry that was written in those times. It was called Sangam poetry. And that was from about 250 BC to about 200 AD. Then later on, the Cholas that we associate with Rajaraja, we give them the term imperial Cholas because of the range and the scale and the depth and the breadth of their achievements. They started their rise into power in the 9th century, and they kind of petered out in the 13th century. Now, we don't know whether the Sangam Cholas and the imperial Cholas were actually connected in any way, but they did rule in the same region, which was around the delta of the great Kaveri Delta in Tamil Nadu. And the later Chola kings kind of claimed descent from these earlier Chola kings. There are a lot of poems written about them that are really beautiful. It's like they're so fresh and contemporary that it feels like we can relate to them, and it was as if they were written yesterday. So they're very heroic and like all court poetry or royal poetry, full of chest thumping and hyperbole, but they claim descent from that as if to say, see, this is a greatness that we have come from, and this is our heritage and lineage. So, you know, so I have told their story too here, to the extent that we know of.
While this is happening in the southern part of India, the Rashtrakutas are actually here on the land that we are today.
Okay, exactly. And I'm sorry we were enemies. So.
Yeah, it is. But yes, just added information that the Rashtrakutas have a copper inscription from King Krishna III, which is found nearby here in Devli, which mentions about Nagapura Nandivardhana, which tells us the evidence of that our city Nagpur existed even from that time. So that's a prehistoric thing that we actually get to know from. So we are in the same era.
Exactly, and absolutely. And Krishna III is written about. I mean, he
actually
was a major thorn in the Chola side. So, but I did not know about this Nagpur connection. So that's amazing.
It tells Nagapura Nandivardhan we are here today.
Okay.
So also these I mean, the battles that they had, in which all these kings, they are having a vast kind of military, and the battle to Sri Lanka
Yes.
or Ceylon.
Yeah, they were big, bloody, brutal battles. So they were fought on horseback, they were fought on elephant, on foot. And it's interesting to read the accounts of these battles because you'll have one side claiming victory and you'll have the other side claiming victory too. So that's why it's so hard to kind of pluck out nuggets of fact, you know, so from this much of hyperbole and this much of chest thumping. But yes, so Rajaraja fought some of the most brutal battles were fought against the Chalukyas and the Rashtrakutas who were from the Deccan region and Sri Lanka too. He decimated Sri Lanka. And
the development of the maritime or the navy actually.
Yes, so one of the reasons he went into Sri Lanka was that those ports in Sri Lanka were part of the maritime trade route that went on to Southeast Asia and then with China. So it's interesting, you know, we think we know it all today in the age of Google Maps and everything, but they have their finger on the pulse of a world well beyond their borders. And even the Sangam Cholas, which was, as I said, from 200 and something BC to 200 AD, they were people, traders coming from Greece and Rome, those worlds, trading, you know, Megasthenes and Ptolemy and all these people have written about the cities of southern India and raved about how prosperous they were and how the streets were paved with people coming and buying stuff. Rajaraja himself figured out that, China, getting a favored trading partnership with China would be very lucrative. So they did all sort of undercutting deals to kind of, it's a like double-faced diplomacy. Their big rivals were the Srivijaya kingdom in Southeast Asia, like Malaysia and Indonesia today. So they had to pretend to be friends and also kind of backstab them at the same time to hedge all their bets. It was a very, very interesting period in history, and you have to admire them about how they found out what they did, but they were very aware of and very involved in a world beyond their immediate borders. You know.
Yeah, and it's not that only now the so-called globalization is what is happening,
Absolutely.
But it is from the 9th century that we can evidence.
And before that. And
yeah, exactly,
yes.
Even before that.
Yeah.
So there's this thing that you have mentioned, they had sent a lot of pearls, and even the mention of what kind of pearls they sent to China, you know?
Yes. So pearls were again another big reason for Rajaraja's interest in Sri Lanka, because the waters around Sri Lanka and to the south of the Chola, core region were rich in pearl fisheries. So pearls was such a big deal. They were used to as adornment for their ritual, for their gods and things like that. And they classified about 10 or 12 different types of pearls, black water pearls, whitish pearls, white pearls, cream pearls, brackish water pearls. And all this was made note of, So, and these were all inscribed on temple walls, the kinds of pearls that were used. And
this being sent there to China.
Yes, to bribe the emperor.
And the language is something, though, we might not actually know.
So I will talk about that since you mentioned it. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. So around the same time that Rajaraja Chola came to power, which was in the 10th century, late 10th century, the Song dynasty in China came into power. And the emperor there decided that sea trade was the way to go. And he sent out word. He kind of said, if you become a trading partner with us, we'll give you, favored trading status, and we'll make sure that you get benefits and your taxes are lowered, etc., etc. So this sparked this big trade war, in that whole region, India and to its east, with China. And everybody was like eager to get a piece of the pie because it meant a lot of money, great commercial gain. So Rajaraja got in on the action as well, and he sent a trade mission. He sent a ship with a bunch of guys from Nagapattinam, which was a big Chola port, all the way to southern China. It was at the very end of his reign, and the journey took about 3 years almost, because it made multiple stops along the way. And they finally made it to China, presented the emperor with pearls, apparently just scattered pearls right in front. And he also sent a letter, which I just burst out laughing when I read it, because he says, you know, I am this little humble mosquito from this barbarous town, and I'm humble to send you all these little cheap offerings for somebody as great and as grand as you. And here's Raja calling himself, you read out the description earlier, a line of the cholas and the gem and this and that, calling himself a little mosquito from a barbarous town. And again, I don't know whether this was from a Chinese account of that visit, whether the Chinese made it like this, or this is how medieval diplomacy worked. I found it all so the human element of all this was really, really interesting. Unfortunately, by the time the Rajaraja's mission reached China, he was dead. He never knew what happened. But he did get himself favored trading status, and they made a lot of money that way. Yes.
And this is the Rajarajas, kings of kings,
exactly.
who's saying all of these things.
He's saying a little
them.
mosquito from a barbarous town. So,
yeah,
and at that point, he had built one of the grandest temples anywhere in the world at any time. He'd finished building that, and then he writes this letter that.
Oh, yeah. So this grand temple that we are talking about here is even alive today for all of us to actually just feel what it was at that era. So we just have few images. I think we can just show and have a context of what we are talking here. So if you just show all of us the Brihadeshwara temple.
It is in Tanjavur. I don't know how many of you have been there. It's just a hop and a skip away. Oh, great. I'm glad to see that. It is just absolutely magnificent. It was completed in the year 1010, and it looks like it was just finished. It's beautiful. It's an architectural marvel. I guess they'll put up the picture, but just to give you an idea, temples until that point were small things, like one
brick.
Yes, brick, and then they were converted into stone so that they would be more permanent. But they were like 2-story structures. That was about this. And then Rajaraja comes along and builds this massive 11-story structure that is, maybe the Vimana one. That is just mind-boggling in its architectural complexity, in its beauty. There you go. You see it and you just want to cry. It brings you to tears. It's so magnificent. And there was nothing like this ever built anywhere. And there's no cement or stucco or anything joining the granite blocks together. It was just the weight of they were hammer dressed, cut perfectly, and everything just sat on each other. And the weight of each stone sitting on the other stone kept the whole structure stable. There have been a few small earthquakes in Tanjavur after that. Nothing has happened to that. I also want to mention, since the theme of our conference is inclusion and diversity, this was not merely a religious center. I think it was a very smart strategic move on Rajaraja's part, because for the first time, the boundaries of the Chola Empire exploded beyond their traditional Chola heartland in the Kaveri. So they had conquered the Deccan here. He came almost as far as Nagpur. He had gone all the way into Sri Lanka, eastward into Telangana, to Kerala. Almost the entire peninsular South India was his to command. Exactly, and the Maldives too. So now he had under his kingdom, under his crown, a huge diversity of people who probably spoke different languages, who worshipped different gods, who were different clans, tribes, who all hated each other. So he somehow had to make them feel that they were part of one whole. So until that point, as I said, Chola temples were small structures. But not only that, every single temple was built in a village with a very strong existing religious association. There was a Bhakti movement that swept through South India in the 6th and 7th century, and many saints and saint singers traveled through the villages of southern India, and temples sprang up in those spots. So there was each of them had a rich religious association. Tanjavur, on the other hand, had nothing. So it was a blank slate upon which Rajaraja poured everything. Huge mammoth sums of money, labor, all his war booty was poured into this, something of the size that had never been seen before. So it was like his way, I think, of making everybody feel this is mine. It was equally relevant or irrelevant to everybody because it had no association for anybody. It was something they could be proud of. The entire kingdom was kind of coddled, I don't know, willingly or not, but into its working. So every village all over, even from far as Sri Lanka, was made to contribute revenues towards the upkeep and running of maintenance of the temple. So, I guess they felt invested in this temple, and it was his way of kind of unifying them in a way. And what better symbol than a religious symbol, right? You cannot argue with that, with some great god that is kind of watching over the kingdom. So it's a temple that is in work to this day, and it's beautifully maintained by the Archaeological Survey of India, as you can see. You must go. It's not far at all from here. It's absolutely worth a visit. And the other thing is, its walls are crawling with inscriptions. Every inch practically of wall space has inscriptions, and he has given in detail that you can't even imagine about the working of the temple, about, like I said, every type of pearl that is even as small a detail as that. And everybody who contributed also had their contributions recorded on the temple walls. And so it's a very rich source of historical information as well. Temple walls were like public records, offices on which a lot of information was made available.
So it's not that the colonial era only had the denoted things wherein we get all the archaeological evidences,
yes.
But it is back then to them that we can actually credit to give
I
us...
think so. There must have been a sense of history to record all of this.
And initially in the Sangam time you said that there were inscriptions on the palm leaves.
Yes. Well, the palm leaves came later actually. So these were poetry that was written during the Sangam times. And those are amazing. They're beautifully translated. A.K. Ramanujan has translated a lot of this. So there are two genres of Sangam poetry called Agam and Puram. So Agam are what are known as internal or inner poems about people's inner lives. So those are more about love and relationships. And again, they're so contemporary. You see what lovers talk about then as what they talk about today as well. The other type is called Puram, which is known as outer poems, or these are poems about kings, about wars, about dynasties, about external things. So they're really an invaluable source of information about the, kings and the times and the trade and the ethos and the politics and the culture of those times. So.
Actually, today, while we deal with the very recent history, we have no evidences to tell anyone. But something from the 9th century, for us to have an evidence of today is amazing.
It is amazing.
And that's how actually we could have this book here today with us.
Yes.
So how was it that you... went through all the inscriptions and what language actually it's all in, and how did it actually decipher?
I had it really easy. So as I said earlier, I stood on the shoulders of giants. So the interesting thing is, there was a report written in Tanjavur, I think in the 1800s, where they write about this temple, Brihadishwara, where they mention a totally different king. They said there's this temple in Tanjavur that is the biggest temple there, and we think it was built by another king's name was given. So in the 18th century, the memory of the Cholas was there, but it had kind of dimmed and it had fragmented, and they didn't even remember Raja's time anymore. Enter the 18th and 19th century, when the field of Indian epigraphy came alive. And there were two people actually, a German called Eugene Hultz and a South Indian called Venkaya. They worked as a duo who worked to try and understand. It was from a Tamil of an earlier era. So they had to first understand that Tamil, learn it, understand it. They made rubbings of these, inscriptions. Just imagine in really difficult conditions, because a lot of the inscriptions are in little nooks and niches. So they had to make rubbings of that, spread that out, have them written down, and then translated, and then transliterated also, and then analyzed. So all these have been now recorded in these volumes published by the Archaeological Survey of India, starting from the 1800s, called the Epigraphia Indica. and they're such a pleasure to read. They're really nice. And it's all, a lot of it is available online, digitized, and it's available online at no cost. So it was like all the dirty work has been done for me. You know, it's all there in English. And I mean, you have to wade through tons and tons. So and so gave so many sheep, and so many lambs to this temple. So through the trivia, you have to kind of wade through that, and then you step back and you get the bigger picture of life in those times. So,
yeah. So this Brihadeshwara, here actually everyone can also see the humans to just know the scale of the building.
Yeah, and this is
how
not even the
huge it
tallest.
is at that time.
Yeah.
You'll have to transcend yourself actually to just know what era we are in.
Exactly.
And it's at times difficult because now for us, to connect there is a bullock cart, and then we are now in some kind of car.
Yeah.
So that kind of relation.
Exactly.
In fact, furthermore, beyond that it is.
Yes.
So this was also called as Rajarajeshwara temple.
Yes.
So
He named it after himself. Another brilliant move on Rajaraja's part. He named the deity and the temple after himself. He called it Rajarajeshwaram, and even the main lingam was called Rajarajeshwara. And he had 2 bugles that would accompany the Nataraja idol out in procession. They were also named after some of, he was a man of many names, as you saw, Jewel of the Cholas, they're all named after him, So it's like Rajaraja is there everywhere. And he anointed himself with this halo of, greatness and sanctity, and kind of made religion a part of his strategy to validate himself and to justify everything he did, his greatness.
In your words, Rajaraja would be, and how would you actually see him?
Oh, I think King of Kings does say it.
Aptly.
I mean, he was a mixed bag. We had this earlier discussion where I think it's a shame to paint people as good or bad or evil or, he was everything. He was good and bad. He was extremely brutal, but he was also very compassionate. He was very generous, but he coveted other people's lands. So it's all that. He's a very complex human being, which is what makes him fascinating. I think he was really, really fascinating. And his brand is like larger than life. Just look at the temple, So, which is why we are talking to him to this day. Absolutely. Everything was like on a scale exponentially larger than what had been done before him. So
history is actually at times very organic, naive, interesting, but very awful also.
Exactly.
Once you go deeper into
it is awful. Yeah, you can't do all this without creating a lot of damage also. So
actually, so it's someone's territory that is building this here.
Yes.
So also about the bronze that they use. So it's something even till date they are practicing that craft.
Yes. Again, if you go to the villages around Tanjavur, Kumbakonam is a big place. So just to give you, for those of you who don't know about it, these are the bronze images that were made to be taken out in procession. And this is also an example of, I guess, inclusivity in those times, because unfortunately only certain castes and people were allowed into the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. So in South India, they came up with these processional images that would be taken out, and they kind of represented the god. They were invested with divinity, and they would be taken out in procession, and that anybody could get a darshan of that version of God. I mean, he had the same power, or she had the same power as the immovable stone deity within the temple. And this art of bronze cast images reached its peak during Chola times. They are exquisite. They're really, really beautiful. There you go. That is Nataraja, the dancing lord, made out of copper. It must weigh about 1,000 pounds. Every image is unique, and these images are made to this day using the same technique that was used 1,000 years back. Would you like me to explain how it is made? Or, I'll just give you a quick thing about it. It's called the lost wax method. So the way these images are made is there's first a model of the image made out of wax, on which all the details are etched, whether the jewelry they're wearing, their fingernails, the eyelashes, every detail is made on that wax model, which is then covered with a clay model made out of clay. And in fact, the silt or the clay of the Kaveri River in that region is very, very fine, and it is believed to be perfect for this purpose. So the whole wax image is cocooned in this clay image, and it's left out to dry. And then there are also little holes made all over the image. Once the clay image is dried, it's held over fire, and then the wax melts, and it kind of runs out through those holes. So now you have a hollow clay image into which screaming hot metal is poured. So it takes tremendous skill, and you can't you're creating something divine, so it has to be perfect. So they were enormously skilled in doing this.
People do it.
Exactly, yeah. And there's all these ceremonies and rituals that were done beforehand to invest it with the divine power and everything. So you have metal poured into this clay mold, and then afterwards the clay is kind of broken off, and you have the metal statue. And then there's this, under the finest Chola craftsmen, there is very little fine-tuning that is done. It emerges almost perfect. So each image is unique because the wax thing is gone, right? And then you kind of add in the details. And then
we don't have any of these now to see.
Oh, yeah, there are.
Okay,
I mean, there's another long story there, but many of them have been stolen or they've vanished. Yeah, but many of them are still there, yeah. Yeah. I think this one is from the 10th century, actually, so.
And the book, it's so amazing that we can actually travel along the line right from the dynasty of Vijayalaya to the end,
Yes.
like even after Rajaraja.
Yes.
So there are these edifices all along the route actually, there which are built.
Yes.
And there's also a temple built by the son of Rajaraja.
Yeah. So let me talk about that. Rajaraja, as you know, was grand and great and everything. His son, he made him the Yuvaraja, or the king in training, or the crown prince, a few years into his reign. His name was Rajendra. And Rajendra assisted Rajaraja in many of his battles. He was a worthy successor to his father. But I think there must have been a very interesting psychological dynamic going on here, because I've told you about Rajaraja's temple, how he poured so much of money and resources and thought and everything into building this temple. 2 years after he died, Rajendra builds his own temple in a totally different place that is called Gangaikonda Cholapuram. It's about 60 kilometers to the north and east of Tanjavur. Again, a blank slate. He builds this beautiful temple. I think we have a picture of it. Yeah. It's like a smaller, gentler Brihadishwara temple, but as stunning, I think. Yeah, that is the one. The Vimanam, the tower structure is slightly shorter, but it is no less stunning. And most of the villages that had been made to, contribute money to Rajaraja's temple, that money was now diverted to Rajendra's temple. And I think Rajaraja's temple just kind of fell by the wayside. This Gangaikonda Cholapuram became the Chola capital. This became the main temple of worship. Why would Rajendra do that? He clearly had a need to prove himself that if my father was great, I'm greater, So he was not like this dutiful son who stayed in his father's shadow, but he emerged out of it in style and, in his father's own inimitable way. He created a mark himself. So I think it's fascinating, the father-son, dynamic. Yeah.
Actually. Is there something from the book that you actually want people to know in specific? Not giving away, just
No, there's nothing to give away. I would say this about any history, it is very, very complex. You read it, and I admire Rajaraja, but I don't think he's like somebody. I said this earlier also, that he's somebody I'd like to have dinner with, so history is complex, and I hope I have kind of covered that. There's, as I said, the whole range of the gamut of emotions and experiences, from utter brutality to compassion and greatness and grandeur. These Cholas covered it all, So, and they left their mark in a very, very difficult time, but in a very, very memorable way. So, yeah, it's interesting. So,
Interesting to know Rajaraja through you also.
thank you.
And we can also travel along the route,
Yeah.
what they have maybe conquered or built.
Yes, yeah. It's ups and downs just came and went, you know. It was not like a neat trajectory, but it was like a roller coaster ride that
Actually,
kept,
right from his
kept going.
father
Yes.
doing a war, and then he coming into power, and why he's not there, and his
Yes.
uncle's son is
Exactly.
there.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's all messy, obviously.
Exactly. History is messy. I guess that is the takeaway.
Actually.
And
also, you to be sane in this complete process. Because it's very messy, and also the names.
yeah.
There's this incident, where you have written the names are the monikers. you say.
Monikers, yeah, many of them were monikers. So a lot of them have the same name. So it's like it adds to the confusion of everything. So many of the women were given names that identified them as belonging to a particular area, a particular clan or a tribe or a dynasty or something. So many queens would have the same name. And since I'm not a historian, when I started out, I said, what is going on here? Is this the same person? Why is she still around so many centuries later? And then I realized that, that's not the case. So
You just have to be sane to the whole
yeah,
process.
I don't know if I was sane. It was, but anyway, I emerged, just survived, I guess. So
Yeah. So actually, thank you for bringing this book to us. And if we want to have some question answers, we can.
yes.
You have been a management consultant.
Oh God.
And
That
you have
question.
been a historian, and you talked about double diplomacy. So my question stems from that.
Okay.
Adam Smith, in one of his works, he says too much of morality, if extended beyond, creates a problem. So being a consultant and being a historian, do you think that as human beings, when we live our daily lives, we should put a cap to our morality?
Oh my God. Well, all of us would, I don't even know how you define a cap to a morality. I'm sure each one in this room here will have our own personal and individual definition of morality. So I don't know how to answer that properly, actually. So I don't know that just because the Cholas were very religious and they built these temples, I do believe that was a part of their strategy, as I said earlier. So I wouldn't call them very moral people. As I said, they did very what would be considered morally pure things, but they also did very morally immoral things as well. So I don't know how to answer your question. I'm sorry. So, but yeah.
Ma'am, a later question then. Punniyin Selvan. Have you watched that movie, ma'am? Is there any link to this?
I did watch the movie, although I didn't read the books. So the link is, it is set during the Chola period, okay? And it is set in the period just before Raja comes to the throne. And you alluded to it. So there's a period of they rose in unstable and chaotic times, but there was a period of extra chaos and instability. After Krishna III, the Rashtrakuta king, he won in a major battle, and the Chola fortunes just plunged. They had been kind of crawling their way up, but then they kind of fell down. It's a game of snakes and ladders. That's how it was. So they had come down this very long and slippery ladder, and there was anarchy in the kingdom. Nothing is actually spelled out, because the Chola inscriptions, the way they present themselves is like everything is, rosy-eyed and la-di-da and everything. So you have to, again, read between the lines. So there was a succession dispute. So Rajaraja's brother was due to become king, and he was murdered. We don't know why. And Ponniyin Selvan is centered around that. Why was he murdered? Obviously, we don't know, so it's kind of ripe for a story. So some people believe that he was murdered by Rajaraja. Some people believe he might have been murdered by the person who became the next king, who was Rajaraja's uncle. And some people, which is probably the right answer, believed he was murdered by the Pandyas, who are another dynasty, who are the enemies of the Cholas. So Ponniyin Selvan takes this whole situation and creates a story out of it. This uncertainty, this murder of Rajaraja's brother, all the conspiracies that might have gone on, a bit of a love story, So many of the characters are fictional. Some actually did exist, but certainly not in the shape and form they're portrayed in Ponniyin Selvan. So just take it as that, as a good rollicking yarn, So, but if you think you're going to learn any history from it, sorry, no, not really.
But the history, the book is there.
Yeah. But Kalki, who wrote the book, did a lot of historical research to kind of recreate, the times and the place and everything. So it is based on a foundation of historical research. So you have to give him that. And the movie is a movie, so it has to, entertain. It has had a masala, as you said.
So I have a question. It's right here. Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. So this might be a bit of a stretch, but I'm going to try it anyway.
Okay.
So I went to a political science seminar when I was in graduate school where they talked about how in China, because they've had such a long history of empires, the general populace they're used to obeying the government, obeying the state, right? And so China is very coherent. Whatever now it used to be the emperor, now the Communist Party, what they say, they kind of do. Okay. And so my understanding is that the three South Indian dynasties, the Pandyas, the Cheras, the Cholas, they're some of the longest standing dynasties in the world. I know that what it was maybe portrayed as one dynasty is actually two or three separate ones, but still the same people were in charge for a long time. And now there's some differences now between how South India and North India governance has fared since independence. So I'm curious whether you see any evidence if you found anything about how the governance was done in those times that could explain the relationship between South Indians and your government today. Are there any traditions like how things are managed, natural resources, or anything that have explained how, or gender-related things that explain how things are turned out today?
I can't give you a broad answer to it. So some things, for instance, they did have evidence of democratic village management in those days. So there have been inscriptions that were found that showed how a particular village called Uttiramerur near Kanchipuram was governed. So they had actually democratic elections there, and it was only men who were allowed to, be candidates for the election, but they all had to fulfill certain requirements. They had to be of a certain age, between 30 and 70. They had to be of good character. If you had any kind of criminal record against you, you couldn't participate, nor could any family member of yours be, they were considered tainted by your taint. And you had to be educated. I don't know what the education consisted of, but maybe the ability to read certain religious texts, etc., etc., etc. So, and every year a new person was elected, and they had committees and stuff like that. So maybe this concept of, okay, you had a king up there. Rajaraja was, in some ways, he was a figurehead sitting far away. I don't know how far the long reach of his bureaucratic arm reached into the villages. And these villages had been run this way for several centuries, if they say even from Sangam times. So maybe there was a tradition of democratic relations of a sort. I'm not saying that there was definitely, there were caste hierarchies, all that kind of a thing was definitely there. The other thing is women played a role in Chola society also, and across the board, both royal women and those who worked in temples who are not royal, they were agents in a large part of their own lives, so they earned money, they were allowed to spend it and do land transactions without having to say that I'm the wife of so-and-so or the daughter of so-and-so. They transacted on their own names. So maybe some of that mindset has percolated to today, that women were people on their own, and as we know from that North versus South book, women having agency and women having a voice plays a big role in a society's evolution, right? So maybe that is part of what South India is like today. Education was important. Whatever the kind of education you see written about, actually, that reading and being educated in a vast range of things was given importance. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know. But we are not like the Chinese at all. We're like we're squabbling, we disagree. And you see the poetry also, it's like there's so many voices, the people are given voices. You know, the Bhakti movement, for instance, people from all walks of life wrote poems and they were celebrated. They were from all castes, they were men and women, royalty from the poor. All of them kind of rose, and even the Sangamira poets come from a vast swathe of society. So maybe inherently there was a sense of everybody being able to have a voice in society then. So.
Yeah, any other questions? Okay, well, I had one. So there's this thing which is Nadus were created. So is Tamil Nadu something that's coming
Nadu means
from here?
like land or state or something like that. So Nadu is like one of the names for the territorial unit. So the village was called a Nadu in that time. So, yes, so Tamil Nadu comes from that only. So
Oh, so we
yeah.
have a name right from the
yes.
10th
So a lot of the
century, which is
ways the villages are organized or the land is divided is from those times also. So to this day. Yeah.
So
yeah.
the same name.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I just had this thing. So we have more time, or we are okay? Okay.
Sure.
You talked about Rajaraj Chola and his son Rajendra. If you really look at their very complex personalities.
Yes.
And if you look at all of history, people who have achieved are very complex personalities, right? The question is, as ordinary human beings, why do we fear complexity? Why can't we embrace complexity in our own lives and live a life?
I agree with you 100%. You know, each of us is complex. We may not be as complex as Rajaraja and Rajendra, but we need to accept that we are complex, that we embrace many, incompatibles within us. We can be both good and bad, and, you know, that we should never lose sight of that fact. We shouldn't just slot people into things. And
But why do we fear as an individual? I don't want to be complex. I want to be a simple person. But why?
that I don't know. I don't fear. I think I find complexity very interesting. It's difficult to deal with, right? It's always easier to slot somebody into something and then you stereotype them and you think you understand them and you put them in your mental spot. You say, okay, he's this, therefore he's got to be this, 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 and then that's the end of it. So complexity is very, very messy. So I guess that's why we fear it. It's easier to be simple. And
McKinsey taught you to love complexity.
yeah.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you so much for a wonderful session.
Thank you.
I just want to ask you, what are the 3 takeaways from this book that you have written that we should all have?
Okay. Well, I would say think big, aim for the sky. That is what Rajaraja's shtick was. That was his thing. The other thing that he was amazing at was he was very, very detail oriented. Okay, he crossed all the T's and dotted every I. So that was also part of his greatness. He in every aspect, whether it was the way he organized his villages, the way he ran his military campaigns, the way he built his temples, he looked into every detail and made sure that everything was taken care of. And you want a third one? And the third one, I would say, is again, it's related to think big. It just keep your eyes and ears open. He was so aware of a world. Yes, he was busy fighting battles, and he could say, I'm busy fighting battles, I don't have time for anything else. But he knew that there was a big world out there to be, you know, to take advantage of, or whatever it is. And he made himself part of the world. He risked big. I'm sure he lost big also, but he gained big also. So maybe those are the 3 Rajaraja takeaways.
Thank you.
Ma'am, hello.
Hello.
From what I could gauge is that Rajaraja Chola focused on the concept of territorial empire as well as cultural empire both.
Yes.
But while expanding in both these areas, there is something called awareness about security culture in the people, among the people.
Security
So,
culture?
That means awareness about security and other issues, because since he fought a lot of battles, so there must have been phases of instability or some strain on resources and everything. And at the same time, external influences, maybe threat of invasion or other things. So that requires gently to have some kind of security culture, awareness. So what were specific efforts, if there were any, made by Rajaraja to increase that level?
So he actually had people, like security people or military people, posted, especially in the margins of his empire. As I said earlier, his actual reach would reach only so far. Beyond that, who knows what was going on. So it was Rajaraja and the Cholas did a few things. So they posted military personnel in temples, which was where a lot of valuable stuff was sold, was stored actually, and these military personnel ensured that law and order was maintained there. The other thing he and his later Chola emperors also did was they employed, all these kings had multiple sons, right? So they employed these sons and nephews as viceroys in faraway districts. And this kind of ensured loyalty. You do the best you can. You can't always assume that it's going to work out well. But there was actually not too much of succession dispute post-Rajaraja. And this was one reason why. They employed their sons and nephews and trusted people as viceroys in the fringes of their kingdom who maintained law and order. They had a very, very active spy network that would send information, pass on information back and forth. So they did what they could, And it was a prosperous kingdom. So, when people are economically comfortably off, they're less likely to revolt. And I think he saw that. So he rewarded them if they were sent money to his temple. They felt that they were part of this thing, so part of this bigger whole, and it behooved them to invest and participate in what the kingdom had to offer. So that too, the economic incentive was there for them to not revolt and be a part of it, because they'd seen so much of instability. Maybe they actually didn't mind being part of something that was relatively stable for the time being.
Due to paucity of time, I would request Nagpur readers that our dynamic, spontaneous and most knowledgeable author, Ms. Kamini Dandapani, will be available in the lawns. You can buy her book, get it signed by her, indulge in a conversation as much as you want. Please continue the conversation in the lawns. Rajaraja, King of Kings, was extremely complex and equally fascinating. Thank you, Kamini Dandapani, for this trip to the past. I now request our moderator, Ms. Mandira Nevare, to give this special token of appreciation to the author. The gift is a handmade painting that has been personalized for Ms. Kamini Dandapani. We are proud to be associated with such talent at Alag Angle. I request the moderator to hand over the gift back also to the author and usher her back to the audience. Thank you so much, ma'am. Yes, I have the name. Her name is Sharvari Revatkar. Yes. Thank you, ma'am.